Hello, everyone. Welcome to CYBR603 Integrated Systems Architecture. And this is Learning Activity 4, and we're into week 2. And we're going to pick up the pace this week, and we'll pretty much be a nice, steady, busy with this course as we move through CYBR603 in the second half of this pleasant spring. So first up, we've got VMOST. So this is what's called the Vision, Mission, Operation, Strategy, Tactics. So that's where VMOST comes from. And I really like talking about this, especially in the systems architecture space, but it's actually useful for really any type of strategic development from a business planning perspective. So I like to showcase VMOST and talk about its pros and cons and talk how just high level. So we'll spend a few minutes talking about that before we get jumping into DODAF. So let's go ahead and jump into the first step. So when you look at VMOST, it's a pyramid. It's especially in terms of the intellectual and visual, textual properties that go into the development of VMOST. So at the top of his vision, and then as we go down all the way down to tactics, you start to get into more and more, of course, details, more products, more data, more everything. Vision is just like it sounds, real high level. Mission, of course, sets the tone. Objective starts to get into goal setting. What is it specifically? It's kind of more KPI driven in the middle. Then strategy, and then of course out of those strategies gets into the mechanics of how do I execute on all the individual initiatives that might come out of a primary vision that's being set by an organization. So let's start off with like the high level. VMOST, it's not something that Mike Pritchard made up. It's actually been around for a good number of years now by a gentleman by the name of Rakesh. It's actually something that you can find if you probably backed up about 15 years ago. You didn't see a lot on the internet. But VMOST is something that's caught on. You can actually search on it. A lot of different organizations have picked up on it these days. Even 10 years ago, when I came across the concept, it was not really widely known, even in the Deloitte consulting world that I was navigating in at the time and swimming through. But it's definitely picked up some steam, and you can find it in a lot more use these days. So like I said, vision, this is the organization's purpose, its values, how you go about doing business. It's a really, really simple. Usually when you're setting up visions, they're really very, very easy to understand. Same with missions. They're very, very easy to understand. Objectives, again, they're easy to understand, but the purpose of objectives in this case have a little bit more of a performance indicator perspective or a data metric associated to it, so that as you lay out your vision, as you lay out your missions that are associated with that, you'll have objectives that are being held to a type of goal of some kind, some data assigned goal. That's probably the best way to say it. Something that's rooted in something that's evidentiary, not something that is an objective that's just really too obscure or unmeasurable, if that makes sense. This will make more sense when we get into the details. Strategy is an overall plan for a specific area to meet. You will probably have multiple strategies as it relates to an individual objective. And then, of course, multiple tactics to achieve a given strategy. So, to a certain extent, all of these, they kind of have a Karl von Clausewitz kind of perspective to them, and that's what I think to a certain extent makes it really accessible. And that's really what's kind of nice about VMOST is it's easy to understand, and it's easy to lay out kind of a strategy as it relates to that. Okay, so step one. So how do you go about building out this? And first up, why is this even important to architectural development as an integration architecture course? So first up, I'll say that before you jump into VMOS, the reason why I like to say this is as system architects, we're in the storytelling business. There's two things that kind of bookend um, that bookend what it is that that we're trying to teach you in this course. The first one is setting it up with VMOST to give you the broad thinking, and then to cap it on the bookend is the SCQA. So there's in addition to DODAF in the middle, one of the things that we're doing is setting up VMOST as a framework for you to get vision, mission, objectives, strategy, and tactics as a broad overarching blanket over the DODAF architecture that you're going to build. And that's an architectural, that's an artifact driven framework. And then we bookend that with being able to storytell it, SCQA, situation, complication, question, answer. And that's a storytelling method. So there's this, the best laid plans and the best laid architectures and the best laid programs and the best laid anything doesn't really work well unless you have an ability to communicate it out. So that's why we have VMOST, DODAF, and SCQA. So those are kind of what I just want to impress upon everyone in the class, that those are the three big takeaways. If anything you take away from this course is it's VMOST, DODAF, and SCQA. Okay, so I'm done with that. You'll probably hear more about it. Let's jump into the rest of the VMOST conversation here. So VMOST, step one. So first up, you want to choose scope. You want to get a feel for, in terms of what it is that your organization is doing. What's the product? What is it doing day to day? What is its overall, not just contributing vision to itself, but what is its contributing vision to the world? It's really meant to be a really big, expansive visioning. I mean, you want to be asking yourself, it's what does this do? What do we do? What is it that this architecture is doing for the world? If you think about it, and if it's not the world, then maybe what is it doing for the nation? What is it doing for the state? What is it doing for your community? These are all different things that you can kind of think about from that perspective. But that's really what the vision statement is meant to be, is determining what it is that you have, what it is that your architecture is doing, what it is that your system is doing, what is it that your product is doing, and how does that impact the community, the state, the nation, the world. You pick a level, right? But that's the idea. Okay. Next up, after step one, we get to step two. And then there's some pieces that we have to get as it relates to each one of these areas. So for the VMOST areas, but we need a vision statement, and we need to go about collecting information for vision statement. And what does that mean? But it has to be concise. And then usually a vision statement only has about 2 to 3, probably no more than 3 mission statements. You probably don't want to get more than 3. I think that might be, even for a really large company, you probably only need to have 2. But that's why I say probably don't want to go more than 3 mission statements. So for every 1 vision statement, you probably want to stick to 2 mission statements. And then out of those 2 mission statements, you're probably going to have 2-ish key objectives. And so those are how you're going to define success, or really, I mean, high level, the goals that you're going to attain. Again, it's going to be data driven, evidentiary. Your key objectives have to be rooted in like some kind of measurable phenomenon. Otherwise, this whole VMOST architecture, and really what you're trying to do is just rooted in nonsense if you can't get it back to some kind of key performance data evidentiary objective. And I can't stress that enough. It has to be rooted in evidence-based practice. And that's one thing as a systems developer, systems engineer, You're going to find yourself becoming so much more appreciative of that fact when people start asking for, like, well, what are we doing? How are we going to be doing this? What is this system's purpose in life? And when you're able to at least define what the key objectives is in a data evidentiary perspective, it's going to make your life so much easier. Okay, and keep you out of trouble too. So next up, you've got strategy, and then tactics used to execute on that strategy. So that's step 2. So step 3 is getting into asking some tough questions. You got to really dig into. I've already mentioned like key measures, right? Finding a mission statement that of course is high level, and then vision, high level vision, but you need to define those data points that link into that mission and vision. So you got to ask yourself the question of what are those key measures. Second up is how do you achieve those objectives, in terms of where is it coming from? How are you going to be able to describe to your audience the ability to make those objectives happen? That's what you got to ask yourself. Next question is how do you, in terms of, does the organization have the capacity? And really, it's kind of like an executive sponsorship question, right? Does the organization have the appetite to support the objectives that you're laying out? And on top of that, you got to ask yourself, especially with VMOST, you got to ask yourself, does the organization even have the data capability to measure the objectives that you're laying out? And that, is super critical and hard. You think it's easy to do, but it is extremely difficult to do. It's not straightforward. It's not that easy. It takes some doing, and and of all of the things here, I really think that that's probably one of the hardest things to do is defining the metrics, and then the metrics for the objectives, and then getting an agreement on those objectives. And if you get an agreement on those objectives, great. And then going and finding the data that calculates those objectives and metrics, right? So being able to track that down is great. If you can do that, and that's amazing. But you need to do that if you're going to have a successful VMOST strategy. Okay. Then you get to the easy, in my opinion, once you get through all that, it could take years, honestly, for a really big organization. It could take years to get to that point. And then when you get down to the bottom, it's the execution, it's the tactics. And to me, some of that's the easier part, because then once you've got the 1, 2, and 3 on this list here knocked out, the first 3 bullets, getting the project plan, once you've got the approval and the executive sponsorship, then you'll have the ability to deliver on create the projects and the individual programs necessary to deliver on those strategies. So those are things you got to think about. But these are questions that you have to follow up in step 3. Okay, so you probably want to see an example. So this is a famous one for VMOST as it relates to Google. So Google, I'm not going to read every one of these, but this actually lays it out very nicely. Your vision, and in this case, Google has 3 missions, and then a couple of objectives. And then out of those objectives, I have strategies. And then out of those strategies, I have tactics, right? And you can see here, I've got different products and product teams, but man, talk about, this is big. I mean, you got all kinds of stuff within the Google ecosystem. Now, this is an older diagram. Google's gotten, it's their products have diversified even more since when this VMOST was created, which I want to say was probably 8 years ago. But there's definitely a something that can be gleaned from this. And this is a real world execution of using VMOST in a real world context. Okay, so this is my final thoughts on VMOST. A couple things. I've used VMOST a few times now, and I've personally seen it work and not work. And this is just my personal insights from using VMOST, is I do find that it's useful, but I will say this: I would not overuse it. I would not prescribe it, and don't overthink it. And certainly don't go running around your organization, beating everyone up about like, hey, why aren't you using VMOS? We should be using VMOS. Why isn't everyone using VMOS? Nobody wants to hear that. And another thing, and I can't tell you from my own personal experience, keep it to yourself when it comes to the C level. You don't go in there with this big giant, hey, guess what? I've got this thing. This thing is this VMOS thing, and talking to the CEO, COO, which I've done before. And I can tell you it doesn't land well, because they've heard it all, they've seen it all, and I've been on the other side of it too, where you've got someone that comes up to you with this latest and greatest thing to fix whatever latest and greatest problem that they have, and VMOS isn't the thing to fix it. So the reason that I say these things is VMOS is something that is best used quietly for your own personal use. You want it to and this is the best way to use it, is it's your own personal mechanism for structuring your architecture, for structuring your work product, for structuring your business. Use it quietly and organically grow it. That's the best way to go about, using VMOST. And as a matter of fact, it's the best way of using everything that I'm going to teach you. So VMOST, DODAF, SCQA, every one of these rules that I just put up here applies. So you want to quietly use it for yourself to organize the broader discussion of your system/product. It removes system and put product in there. You can call it whatever you want, but VMOST, DODAF, and SCQA, you're gonna find that even though I'm talking about it prescriptively in class, like, hey, this is VMOST and you're going to use it, and this is DODAF and you're going to use all these different artifacts, and then this is SCQA and you're going to use all the different components of SCQA. I will say that because this is a graduate level course, I am going to be prescriptive. But when you go out in the real world to use all of these, you want to use it quietly and in the background. And you're going to find that you're going to have so much more success by doing it that way. Okay, I think I'm done with VMOS. I think that's all I've got. So there are no next steps other than head over to the next learning activity, which is going to be learning activity 5. And with that, I'm going to wrap up here, and I will see you in learning activity 5.